call me Mr. Bates. You just call me Ivan. You gotta say Mr. Bates. I'm looking for my dad.
Today's broadcast is brought to you in part by Flywire's 2018 White Tie Affair. This red carpet gala will take place in one of Baltimore's most beloved landmarks, Druid Hill Park, Sunday, June the 10th, 5 to 10 p.m. at the Park's Mansion House lawn. Now, for more information, visit radioonfire.com or facebook.com/the-flywire. So we are here at Radio on Fire broadcast facilities alongside my dad. How you doing, Dad?
Good.
You good? You good?
Perfect.
We got a special guest in the building.
Yes.
Introduce yourself, sir.
Hello. Thank you for having me. My name is Ivan Bates. I'm running for state's attorney here in Baltimore City.
All right, that's wonderful. So I guess, where were you born?
Oh, wow. I was born in El Paso, Texas.
Okay.
My father was in the military. We lived everywhere: Texas, New Mexico, Virginia, Germany, back to Virginia. So I've lived all around the world.
Wow. So I'm the only person born in Baltimore here at the table. Dad born in Detroit, and I'm born here in Baltimore. So what brought you here to Baltimore?
It's interesting. Like a lot of the kids out here, when I was in high school, I really didn't pay a lot of attention. So I barely graduated, not because I wasn't intelligent, but because I just didn't pay attention to the work. And I went to the military. My father quickly told me that I couldn't stay at that house, that him and my mother were going to be empty nesters. So I joined the Army. Lived in Germany for a while, realized how hard work it really was, but I learned some valuable lessons in the military. Then I went to Howard University to college, represent Howard all day long, and went to William Mary to law school. I thought I was going to be in Los Angeles clerking for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and I worked out there for a summer. Then my mother called me and said, "Look, your aunt," and actually she lives right up the street. She lived right up the street, 11 West 20th Street, and she was 76, I was 26. She didn't have any children, and my mom asked me to come move to Baltimore to help take care of her. So that was 1994. I moved here in 1995, and I've been here ever since.
All right.
That's an interesting story.
Good story.
Yeah. Shows your caliber. Came in 1995 to spend time with your aunt. That speaks of your character.
Thank you. And I ended up buying a house not too far from her. 1997, I bought a house on Reservoir Street. And, that's when I think I had some of my first taste. Before then, I lived on Biddle Street, so I had the first taste real of Baltimore in terms of that neighborhood. And that's when drugs and crime, they were just at a different level, very similar to what we see now. I remember driving to the neighborhood to look about purchasing a house. They knocked on my window and said that I want red top or blue top. And I didn't understand what they meant. I said, "Hey, how's everybody doing today?" And they looked at me and they just kind of stared at me and shook their head. And I don't think I understood what was happening, because back then I was so green, they like to say. And but from there, I recognized that this is where I wanted to be, and I love this city.
Dan, any question for him?
Yeah. Why? That's interesting, because I came from Detroit, and I really did not love the city when I first came here. So why? What made you? That's a strong. You loved Baltimore.
Well, I love the people. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I liked, the people in Baltimore have a fighting spirit, and I think a lot of times, my aunt, when I moved here, I got to see the city through her eyes, and I became an assistant state's attorney in 1996. Back in 1995, she was mugged. And I remember feeling like I couldn't help her. I wasn't there for her. She was upset. She was crying. The criminal justice system was crazy. So I became a state's attorney because I felt I wanted to do something for her. And I was assigned to Southwest Baltimore, and I recognized, hey, I want to do something for the community, because at Howard I was involved in the community, but I felt I needed to figure it out. So I volunteered to be a middle school basketball coach at Rognell Heights, and I really got to see the city through the eyes of the kids. And I recognize a lot of the kids were like me. They were very smart, very intelligent, but society had counted them out. So I just felt I fell in love with the fighting spirit of people in Baltimore. That, people may not always understand them, and they're going to sit down, they're going to make the best of a bad situation sometimes, but don't count them out, because they can and win and will be able to be survivors and winners. And that's why, for me, I fell in love with Baltimore, because I got to see it through another lens.
Okay. You said we can call you Alvin. Ivan. I'm sorry,
Ivan.
Ivan.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Ivan, let me ask you this. Most people don't know exactly what the state's attorney does. What they do know is that it seems like the state's attorney and the police are kissing cousins. They're very close. So don't you work close with the police officers?
You do and you don't, in the sense that, it's a relationship. It's a relationship to protect the citizens. You have to work together as a team. So yes, in some sense, yes, you are kissing cousins. But you also have to make sure that your first priority is the safety of the community. When you look at the criminal justice system, the most important part of the criminal justice system is the state's attorney's office, especially in Maryland. One, the police make an arrest, and that's a short-term solution. That person who's done the crime or accused of doing a crime is off the street for maybe a night or maybe a year before they're ever actually taken to trial. The judge can only sentence an individual if they're held accountable, i.e., did they plead guilty or did they go ahead and found guilty in trial. 3 years ago, the law changed that said judges could no longer be the ones who decide the sentences. It had to be the state's attorney, and the case is called Sharp. So the state's attorney's office in the state of Maryland is the one who comes up with the plea offers. And so you sit down and say you're charged with felony drug distribution, and they want to go ahead and offer you a suspended sentence, meaning, or let's say they want to offer you 2 years. So you go before the judge and say, the prosecutor go before the judge and say, Your Honor, his guidelines say 2 years to 4 years, we're offering 2 years. The judge may sit down and say, okay, well, could you take a year? The state's attorney says no, then that person can't have a year. But the state's attorney says yes, that person could potentially have a year. But that's only in rare circumstances. When the law changed, what it said effectively was the state's attorney is the individual that holds the keys. So in terms of holding people accountable for the crime that's happening, the state's attorney's office is directly responsible for that.
And I think that's a great segue. On your website, it says, as state's attorney, you do not have the luxury of making excuses and blaming others. We cannot keep waiting for the current state's attorney to deliver results. It's time for a change. So with that's a big statement. So I guess you're saying that you have some changes that you want to bring?
Without a doubt. One of the things that I always ask people, well, first of all, we can agree, crime in Baltimore City is out of control.
Agreed.
It's historic levels. So I ask people, and I think I asked your father this question, if you were charged with a murder, would you hire an attorney who had never defended a murder, had never had any experience doing a murder? No. Well, why do we vote in the current state's attorney? The current state's attorney has never defended or prosecuted a murder. So the only way you can really effectuate change is to understand the problem. So I was a prosecutor for 6 years. I've been a defense attorney since 2002. So I have 23 years of experience. So you're going to bring the changes. One change is looking at the number of prosecutors that were in that office that have left. 3 years ago, there were 210 prosecutors. There are 98 prosecutors who have left in 3 years. 800 years of experience has left. So what does that mean? That means they're not winning trials. So in 2016, there were 175 trials that the state's attorney's office won, but there were 237 losses. And that simply means for the violent offender has seen that for every 10 people that go to trial, 6 violent offenders are being found not guilty and they're coming back home to the community. So when you see the uptick in crime, that's the message. They're not being held accountable. If you do not have the experienced prosecutors, you're not going to win. It's just that simple. And I've seen it from being in the trenches. As a young prosecutor, I remember many a day losing the cases, but then when I was losing cases, I was a misdemeanor. Those cases didn't count. I was there 2-3 years. Now you have prosecutors who are doing felonies and murders only there for a year or two. They just aren't winning.
So it seems like what you're suggesting is the way to stop this uptick in crime is by convicting more people.
It's not necessarily convicting, it's holding people accountable. So maybe the prosecutor isn't winning because it's a bad case. And just because the police bring a case doesn't mean it needs to be prosecuted. See, one of the things I talk about is called community prosecution, and that's what we saw in New York, that they used it effectively, where they sit down and say, who are the stakeholders? It's one, the community, because we're here for the people. Number two, the police and the state's attorney. So let's get together and talk about the crime. Every neighborhood crime is different, and this is a city full of neighborhoods. So for instance, the crime that's in Southeast, let's say Fells Point, they're looking at maybe robberies, car breaking. That's a different set of crime than Sandtown, Winchester. They're looking at murders, homicides. So you have prosecutors, hopefully from the community, that know the community, but they're part of the community. Meaning it's 3 or 4 of them, they go to community meetings, they go to churches, and they talk to the people where they are to find out the crime. If they know where the crime is, they can prepare and put a good case together. So if we know that they sell drugs on Miss Johnson's corner on McCullough and Mosier, but their shop's only open from 9 at night to 11 at night, but Miss Johnson knows that she can tell the police when she goes to their church, like, hey, they sell drugs on my corner. She's not a witness. She's just giving that information. Then it's incumbent on the state's attorney and the police to put together a plan on how to make sure they put a good case together. The days of chasing kids off the corners, those days are over. That's what happens. I mean, it's terrible. You can't just chase these kids off the corner. But why don't we send a car with cameras in it and body cameras to videotape when that young person is selling drugs or that person on the corner is selling drugs? Then we can come back 2 weeks later for search warrant and arrest warrant and arrest you because we have the video camera. Most likely they're going to be released back to the community, but under the law, I can now put together a wiretap on your phone to listen because the kids on the corner are the one bringing the drugs in. It's someone bigger who's making a lot more money. And guess what? We're able then to go up the line to figure out who the people are selling the drugs. So we're not worried about chasing kids off the street, but we're focused on the people who are really doing the crime. And we're not worried about just coming in a neighborhood and locking up every black male who's standing on the corner in a white T-shirt.
Right. That's one thing that I would be concerned about.
We can't be about mass incarceration because
That's
mass
true.
incarceration looks like the 3 of us. It's
true.
black males. And one of the things I also talked about is the crime bill that I've recently seen, and that crime bill has mandatory minimums. I'm against mandatory minimums. Well, unfortunately, the current state's attorney had her office go down to Annapolis to say that that's a good crime bill. And those are the types of things to me that I'm really bothered by. Remember, as a defense attorney, I've seen the criminal justice system through the eyes of the defendants. Some have been rightfully accused and some haven't. And as a prosecutor, I've seen the criminal justice system through the eyes of real victims and to understand what it does and the trauma that being a victim does to individuals and families.
Mosley been here, 3 years?
3 years, yes, sir.
3 years. So now, how would you have handled the Freddie Gray situation differently than she did?
Okay. Well, and in full disclosure, you do, I don't know if you know this, I represented Sergeant Alicia White, the black female. I was the lawyer for her. And, being a black man, it was difficult because, I seen the injustice that has happened to us time and time and time again. And before then, I done sued the police more times and made more money off the Baltimore City Police Department. So for me to get involved in that case, I saw a black woman. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to see the individuals, you have to see the evidence. And going forward, it takes time. You have to understand what your trial team can do. You put the best lawyers forward. The 2 prosecutors that led the trial team for the state's attorney's office, neither one of them had ever prosecuted a homicide. They were not your best lawyers. So the first thing I'm going to do is have my best lawyers involved. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at every single piece of evidence and I'm going to understand how we can win. Because if you bring a case against the police, you have to be able to win to stop that type of behavior. So once you understand that, and once you understand the case, the state's attorney's office, their argument wasn't that Freddie Gray was hurt outside the van. Their legal argument was that Freddie Gray was hurt inside the van. Well, that's the only reason and the only way you charged this black woman, because he was allegedly hurt inside the van when she was nowhere near the van. So you have to figure out your case. What is going to be our theory, and who are we going after? You can't have two separate theories. The other thing that was amazing to me, there was not one single African American or person of color on the state's attorney's trial team. Not one single person. And I recognize black people saw what happened to Freddie Gray totally different than other people.
True.
And so for me, I got to take my time, because when I prosecute the police, which they need to be when they violate the law, you have to do it the right way, because it sends the message that it won't be tolerated.
So it seems like that you're saying that the mistake that was made, or what charges were brought?
It was a rush to judgment and who you brought the charges against. And if you'd taken your time to see the exact people who you want to bring the charges against, you'd realize that Sergeant Alicia White was a witness. You know, one of the things they did, they gave immunity to officers who shouldn't have probably had immunity. And they just put them in front of the grand jury, gave them immunity, and then realized that, they should probably be charged. So then they had to come up with a different theory of what happened. I think politically it was, if we just charge, that's just good enough for the community. But the community really deserved more. And that's, to me, what you sit down and see. The community deserved more.
So in actuality, what you're saying is that you wouldn't have brought any charges because you felt that they rushed the
No,
charges.
I'm not saying I wouldn't have brought any charges.
Or maybe not when
I
she
think
did.
I wouldn't have rushed it. The investigation was partly completed. It wasn't fully done. But based on what I saw and what I knew, I think you did have an avenue to bring charges against at least a couple of them. I think when you sit down and look at it, you have to focus on who you're going to bring the charges on and focus on how you can prove it. And then they didn't have experts that really knew what they were talking about. And when you don't have your experts, whenever you prosecute a police officer, one of the most important witnesses was called a use of force expert. They really didn't have a use of force expert, because the police are going to say, well, we needed to use this type of force because of A, B, C, and D. So you have to be able to combat that, to say, no, you don't need that type of force. And what that officer did was not reasonable. And that's what you needed to have. They never had a use of force expert that said that. And if you don't have that expert, then you can't bring that particular case. But if you rush and you don't have experience, because that's the most important part, you don't know what you need to win.
Here's a question that I've been debating on asking you, but do you feel that police corruption is an issue in the city?
I'm not laughing. No, it's a huge issue. It is the number one issue right now in terms of what's going on in the criminal justice system of Baltimore City. One, look at the gun trace task force. Our current state's attorney knew about the gun trace task force and did nothing. We have documentation showing they knew. I've been fighting Wayne Jenkins since 2010 on police corruption. I've been suing the Baltimore City Police Department and winning money verdicts from my clients since 2007 in reference to police corruption. But then you have to sit down and understand the people in the city don't trust the police. How are you going to trust the police when you sat down and look at them oppress you? So when you sit down and understand that, they have to be a partner in the community. That's why I talk about community prosecution, because it's like a relationship. If you abuse a relationship, you have to start all over again to learn to get that trust. And community prosecution allows that trust to build. But it builds with the police, it builds with the prosecution, but most important, it builds with the community. They need to see that the police work for the community.
That's true. That's definitely not something that they feel in the hood. You know what I mean? That's not.
But how do you stop? Most people assume that the crime in Baltimore is basically associated with drugs. Most of the murders. Let's talk about the murders. Mm-hmm. Drug related.
Yes.
Is that right or is that wrong? Is that right?
I think some of it is. You have a lot of retaliatory murders, and that's what's happening on a whole nother level.
Yeah.
You see the retaliation where Baltimore's a hurting city because so many people have lost loved ones. So you're hurting, and say this person shot and killed your cousin, and they went to trial and they lost, and now they're out on the street. So you want to take the law in your hand, they're going to pick up a gun and go shoot that person. Now, once they murdered that person's relatives or loved ones want to come back and get you.
That's
so
a
that's
cycle.
when it's going back and forth, back and forth. And that's why I say, if you're winning murder cases and you're winning murder trials, people are held accountable. The problem is the state's attorney's office just doesn't hold anybody accountable. So people feel that they need to take the law in their own hand because they're going to hold people accountable. Once you're winning cases and once you win those trials and people are held accountable, then they're not out here to commit murder.
But let me ask you this. You mentioned before we got on the air that you believed in term limits, basically.
I do.
Okay. Now, Mosley came in 3 years ago. So say she was replacing somebody. So she didn't have the experience. So would you say she shouldn't get in because she didn't have the experience, but she's that new person coming in?
I think we don't have the luxury with state's attorney because it's an attorney, it's a lawyer. And because it's a lawyer and it directly affects public safety, unlike any other position, you have to have the experience. It's very similar to doctor. If you need an open heart surgery, you have one doctor that has never done it, but you like that doctor. But then you have another doctor you've heard of and is one of the best open heart surgeons around. You go into the doctor you know, or you go into the doctor who sits down and saves lives. And you look at that position like that, it's that important in terms of that experience at that level.
Well, see, we need to have somebody like that running for president to tell the American people that.
I'm the first one to say that. But no, I don't believe in term. I do believe in term limits because I think what happens in the political game, they forget the people. Now, I never ever ran for political office, and it's interesting talking to politicians. They really don't care about the people. They care about keeping their jobs, and they care about the power that they wield. And to me, it's been absolutely astonishing to see how when you're in office, all of a sudden I'm watching them become part of the system because they don't care about people. When you sit down and look at Nat Oaks, he pled guilty, but they knew that what he had done. And I sit down and look at the system. I look at the current state's attorney. Nat Oaks was one of the fundraisers when he was already under indictment. So you knew he was under indictment by the feds. You knew what had happened because you're part of the process. You knew what he had done, but you're going to have him at your fundraiser raising money for you, knowing that he received money from corrupt officials. What message does that send in terms of the people? What we need to clean house, and we need to get people who are about the people. So if you're there for a term limit, guess what? You have the opportunity to do the job for the people because you're not there forever. Look, I'm a lawyer. I own my own law firm. For me, I'm walking away from my law firm. I'm walking away to a pay cut because I feel I need to be here for the people. I have 23 years of experience. I've been involved in my community here in the cities for 23 years. The things that I've done to try to make people's lives better, that's what I want to see from public officials. What have you done before you decided to run, or did you want to run because you want the power? Who cares about the power? It's the people that we have to care about. And I feel like once we do that, we can really change what's going on in America.
Change is needed. Could you tell us a little bit about the Better Baltimore 4-part plan?
Well, the first thing I talk about is community prosecution. And that's the stakeholders all coming together. The prosecutors, the police, and the community. And once again, I talked about that a little bit. And that's just a collaborative effort, understand the crime in the community and how we focus on that. I also want to focus on violent offenders. I hate to hear repeat violent offender because if you're violent once, why are we going to wait for you to repeat a second time? Because you're going to inflict harm again. So I'm going after violent offenders. I also got to make sure I deal with the juveniles because some juveniles have to be treated as adults and some of them have to be treated as juveniles. But we need to sit down and look, what is the system, and to make sure that what's going on with these kids to make them act out. We need to sit down and focus on them and make sure we can try to get these kids the therapy and treatment through that process. It's the school system. One of the things I like to see is a young man named Kenji Scott's trying to get legislation passed to have the curriculum in school to talk about dealing with violence because they are traumatized. Let's get that curriculum in school. So those are the types of things in terms of violent offenders. Also, I don't like mass incarceration in any way, shape, form, or fashion. We need to make sure we treat drug addiction as a medical problem and make sure we get drug treatment. So maybe we want to send you in jail for a year, but you're in inpatient drug treatment for a year to make sure you can deal with the problems and issues. Also, we have to sit down and deal with mental health. A lot of times in the criminal justice system are individuals that have some mental health issues. They're not criminally not responsible, but the mental health issues have them, maybe they have issues understanding right from wrong sometimes. They need to have that treatment. But also one of the things I think is very big is I see individuals who want to change their life who come home from prison and they have a record, that scarlet letter, and they can't get a job because of that felony. Why are we going down to Annapolis and having nonviolent felonies, the law, so that they can be expunged after maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe most 10 years from the time they finished? Because once that's expunged, then they can get a job. They can go ahead and do the things that they need to do. They pay their debt to society. So that's the third part. And the fourth part is what's going on in the state's attorney's office. A number of state's attorneys' experience is gone. And because experience is gone, it's a feeding frenzy. If you're a defense attorney, you winning cases like you ain't never seen before. Those prosecutors who have experience, a number of them want to come back, and there are other good young prosecutors that we can train. We also have to make sure we devise another method because they failed in terms of the gun trace task force. We have to devise a method to make sure that we don't ask the police to be self-reporting, that we understand what's going on with the police. And when you sit down and understand making sure we have the bite back in the state's attorney's office to winning trials, to making sure that we're protecting the public, it's that 4-point part plan. Community prosecution, going after violent offenders, not locking up everybody, dealing with drug treatment, and giving the respect back to the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, because that office right now is in disarray. I mean, what they've even gone so far is to use our tax dollars to give raises. Do you know the attorneys who did the Freddie Gray case? One of them got a $30,000 raise, and the other got a $25,000 raise. So you don't do that with public service funds. That money could be used to give training to these prosecutors or to give more support staff to these prosecutors who are overwhelmed with their cases.
What do you think about having guns in schools? You think that will help to stem the violence in Baltimore?
You know what? I'm not necessarily a fan of that. I've seen some positives and I've seen some negatives. I do feel if you have a school police officer who's trained on gun safety, and that's the only individual that has a handgun, I can understand that. But it may be only 1 or 2 people who are trained, who are school police officers. I'm not opposed to that, but giving teachers guns, no, that's a terrible idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I agree.
Agreed. So it seems like you're coming at things from the standpoint of you've done this job before,
yes,
and you can continue to do it on a bigger level and with a higher success rate than the current state's attorney.
Exactly. I mean, I just want to keep people safe. And like I said, I do believe in term limits. I think 8 years is long enough for anybody, and you bring somebody in with young, fresh ideas. And I feel that we're in a crisis right now. So yes, I know the job, but I'm also the only person who's in this race that's been on both sides. To be a great prosecutor, you need to understand what it's like to have a young kid who's charged with a crime that has a bright future, and knowing that this kid is innocent. There's nothing more scary in terms of, I remember arguing a case where this kid was accused of attempt murder, and he'd never been in trouble a single day in his life. This kid had the opportunity to go to college, or he's going to have the opportunity to go to jail the rest of his life. And when we did that trial, I was more sick. I was more worried than this kid and his mother. But when the jury said not guilty, and we were in Baltimore County, when they said not guilty, I don't know who cried more, him, his mother, or me. So to be in that situation, you understand what the criminal justice system, the weight of that can do to a young person or to any person that has a future. And we all have a future in this city.
Definitely. How can people find out more about you?
Yes.
Support the campaign?
Yes, for the campaign, you can go to www.ivanbates.com. That's my website. You can find me on Facebook at Ivan Bates for State's Attorney, or you can find me on Twitter at Ivan J. Bates, and also on Instagram at Ivan J. Bates. So that's the way. Reach out, follow me, find out who I am and what I'm about. I just want to give a better Baltimore, because Baltimore, we can do better, but right now our future's not looking the brightest, but I know it's a lot. The sun's about to come out. Today was a rough, rainy day, But look, every day we can get the sun to come out. We just got to make sure we believe and work together. And if we work together as a community, we can really turn the tide. Baltimore's a special city, and I love it.
It is. It is. I love Baltimore too. So early voting is starts June 14th.
Yes, June 14th.
June 14th to the 21st. And the
June
big
26th.
day, the big day is coming up.
Wow.
It is.
June 26th.
June
big day.
26th. So we're knocking on doors, we're talking to the people. I thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, it was really good meeting you, sir.
Yes.
And just ask the people, look, and if you really truly want something better, then you have to vote for better. Otherwise, if you're okay with 300 murders, carjackings have risen 150% in the past 3 years. If that's the life you want, then stay the same. But if it's not, then do better and vote for change.
All right.
Very good.
You got the
Very
last
good.
word, Dad?
Yeah. No, hey, Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better.
Yes.
So
yes.
we'll see.
Yes, sir.
We'll see.
All right, we definitely want to thank everybody for watching. Of course, if you missed us live, you can always check us out on demand, radioonfire.com, also on YouTube. Make sure you download the app, the Radio on Fire Live app, and we'll be back next week.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.